Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank y'all, and I know that y'all got better things to be doing, but obviously this is about folks who have a stake in this game, and I want to bring this meeting to order. This is a study committee on the for-hire transportation and for other purposes, and we'll get to the other purposes shortly. It's passed by House Resolution 1830. We've got 5 members of the committee. 4 in attendance today. 1 member is absent, and he called in and let us know that he wouldn't be able to be here, Mr. Donahue. And if we would at this time, let's start with the good lady to my left and let her introduce herself.
Good afternoon. I'm Representative Lynn Riley, House District 50, Johns Creek and North Fulton.
All right. 21.
John Carson, State Representative, House District 46 in Cobb and Cherokee County.
Representative Dale Rutledge, District 109, Henry County, McDonough.
Thank you. And I'm Alan Powell from Hart County. I'm the guy that they put billboards up about last session about don't kill my Uber. I want to bring this, I'm just going to make a statement at this point. Now, to the committee members, this is more of an organizational meeting today. We've got a handout for the agenda. Now, this study committee is authorized for 5 days, even though it's supposed to cease on December the 1st. At the Speaker's prerogative, it can be extended through the end of December. I'm not necessarily the mind that we may need to go 5 days. We may actually be able to dispatch this work a little bit better. Now, what I'd like for the committee to do is take a look at the agenda from the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and the 5th day. If you see anything particular that strikes your fancy, that you might want to get these people in here, because I want to try to combine them. If there's any way that we can do this in a shorter process in 5 days, I would certainly like to do that. That being said, if you'll be studying that, I'm going to go over a little bit of the background for the committee members of this study committee. In general, the background of this was that last session I had introduced House Bill 907. That bill was heard by the House Public Safety Committee. It was quite an interesting affair. I thought that when I put it in, I thought it was going to be a very simple matter of dealing with the for-hire drivers, people who drive for public livery systems in the state. What we have is a new, thanks to technology and the telephone app technology, then there's new business models that have come into place using GPS, satellite tracking and such, and also the billing. So we've got companies now that have come into business that are using app-based technology. New day in the world. These are diametrically just another company. You have limousines, you have taxi operators, and now you have this new business model of for-hire transportation. It gets a little bit more complicated. I see a couple of the government relations folks here that represent, I think, 2 of the companies. I see Uber and I see Lyft are represented. Do we have any other for-hire companies that are represented? And I don't know that we even have any more that are operating in Georgia today, but you know, I think there's probably dozens of smaller ones nationwide in this new type of business model that's being put out there. But when this came up last year, I thought it was a rather simple affair that, since historically, from the public safety standpoint, that we had always required someone who offers their services as a for-hire driver to stand for a criminal background check to be sure that they were citizens of a particular stripe, because of the sheer nature that as citizens you are calling people who you don't know who they are to drive you. And at that point we found out, well, then got into a little bit of a hornet's nest of that issue last year, because the companies felt like that they needed to do, they could do their own background checks. And so we've got a situation where, do you put more faith in a government background check, or do we decide to let the companies themselves, corporate America, regulate their own selves? And that was part of that issue. During the hearings last year, we ran into another situation that in this evolving business model, that there was a problem with the possibilities that maybe in some of the business models, which is generally called the X model for Uber and then the Lyft, where the average citizen who has a vehicle that has been vetted and scrutinized and such, that they're out driving their personal vehicles to pick folks up based off of the cell phone app technology. They're being paid through that. And but we started looking, and then there came some questions about whether, in fact, the spirit of the law about being properly insured, whether that was actually in effect. To this day, I still don't know. Depending on when you talk to the various companies, a lot of them said that they had an umbrella policy, but yet the insurance industry, I believe, at that point said, but if that driver didn't have a commercial policy, then if they had an accident with a citizen in that vehicle, then that basically they were driving uninsured. Now, I understand, and I will say this up front, we'll be hearing testimony from the insurance industry and all these companies involved, including the limos and the taxis, about insurance and liability. But I will tell you that there's been a good amount of discussion with Chairman Richard Smith of the Insurance Committee. The Insurance Committee is going to be looking at specific language to the credit of these companies that are based outside of Georgia, Uber and Lyft and others, or at least Uber and Lyft. It's my understanding that they're still working on some kind of a corporate type policy that would be in effect for their drivers. So, that's only part of the equation that we're going to be hearing. The other is the sales tax under Georgia law. Taxis, limos, and folks who are driving for hire are supposed to be paying sales taxes. That's already law. That's nothing that I'm going to try to change or anybody else is going to try to change unless it becomes incumbent on us to figure out a new way, something that's more equitable, because it doesn't appear to be that possibly Georgia may not be getting some of the sales tax. I can't say that for a fact, and I don't know, and I think it's very fortuitous for all you folks out there with the transportation referral companies. I'd like to introduce you to your next revenue commissioner right here. So, I think that this is just sort of a nice touch. And if y'all thinking, for some of you folks thinking I actually had something to do with that, no, I didn't have anything to do with that, but I am so proud the governor did. Now, today, you have the charge of the committee in front of you. This is really quite an interesting issue. I think that honestly we can probably scrub a lot of the stuff that's on the first day and just get into the meat of this thing. We have a new business model. Now the question is, should they stand to be scrutinized for background check? Do you think, and do we think that the company themselves should do it? When you know that you have limos and taxis, and understand the limos are regulated by the state, taxis are regulated by local government. Now, do we need to create a system of parity? Nobody in there, myself or no one else, I don't think is trying to juggle the books for one on the other. But there needs to be a system of parity when at least ways it comes to certain things like background checks, insurance coverage, and paying of their tax dues. Now, we're going to hear from taxis and limos, and we're going to hear from the transportation referral folks. And at this point, I think let's just open this on up, and I see representatives. Are y'all prepared today to talk, Bruce?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. Our understanding was that folks were not doing it, frankly, better able to speak to the business than we are. So
You'd rather wait until your corporate folks can be here? All right. Well, and I guess, Reagan, would y'all feel the same way?
Mr. Chairman, the last version of this bill that I have, which is from the end of last session, we sent a letter of support for that bill.
All right.
I don't know where we are at this point on language, but where we were last year, we felt real good about that bill.
Very good. For those of y'all, the committee members that may not remember, at the end of the session, the Public Safety Committee and myself had taken a little bit of a thrashing through the system of social networking. There was a lot that had been said and had been put out there at the time that there was an attempt to put them out of business, and that's the furthest thing from the truth. As it worked out toward the end of the session, we came a lot closer on some of the issues, as you'll see the final substitute on 907. And as Mr. Morris had said, their company that they represent were in favor of it, because apparently there's a problem nationwide today that there isn't a per se specific model legislation. Every 50 state is, all the different 50 states and their jurisdictions are handling this different, because this is a new business model. Nobody's ever seen such a business model. Nobody's ever seen that you can go out and every college kid, every housewife, every unemployed worker who wants to do this, or someone who wants to pick up money on the side, can use their personal vehicles to get out and start and to be a for-hire driver. So it is indeed something new that we're going to be dealing with. I will say this as a matter of kudos to these folks. As we got toward the end of last session, they were in favor of something passing. They wanted to see something to pass. Probably from the public safety standpoint, the number one issue that we were at odds about was the background checks. They felt that corporate background check was adequate enough to stand in place of a government-sanctioned background check. And that's something that we're going to have to deal with, because if you're a limo driver, then you already have that by virtue of having a chauffeur's permit. If you're a taxi driver, then that background is done by the municipal governments. So I guess that being said, we've got a boatload of folks that do want to testify. Is this a proper time with the limo taxi industry? Would y'all like to give a little bit of background about y'all's business right now? Or would y'all rather wait to be on the same schedule with the folks?
Chairman, I'm a representative both the taxi folks industry. If you don't hold it against me, we can, then maybe they may have some other representatives at a later time, but I don't mind speaking about some of the background that went on last year and also some of the issues that we spoke of.
Sure. We don't have any problems that at any time y'all can, members that any of the specific owners and folks of the limo taxi industry, if they want to speak at a later time, when the ride sharing people speak, and I see we have some insurance folks out here, and they can probably be a little bit more succinct and eloquent than I've been about my description of the problem about the liability. If you would, Mr. Snyder, come on up. You might want to tap on that mic to see if it.
Members of the committee, my name is Les Schneider. I'm an attorney with Wimberly & Lawson, and I worked on this issue a great deal last year, and I worked with Mr. Marsh and Mr. Bowers and Mr. Massey on trying to work through exactly what the chairman talked about, which was the new model of transportation services. From the limousine and the taxi perspective, I can say to you that there is no desire to run anybody out of business or not have alternatives for people who want to do for-hire transportation. And that was a myth, I think, that got developed a lot over the social media. I know Representative Powell took a lot of heat for all that, and obviously for that, we're certainly I'm personally regretful because I think it was a lot of misinformation. I think the other two gentlemen I talked about, we worked very hard at trying to come up with a model that would do it. And from the perspective of the limousine and taxi industry, we're concerned about four things. And you'll hear me say this probably more than once, but it's a safe driver, a safe car, the proper insurance, and a fair form of taxation. I'd like to deal with the last one first because we are one of the few states, as Representative Powell indicated, that actually has sales tax on transportation services. Why that came about, and we don't have tax on hardly any other service in the state of Georgia, is beyond me. But it is what it is. That's where we are. It is clear to me personally that there are a lot of honest companies that pay this tax religiously. And there are people who are in this industry who don't pay this tax religiously. I think the Revenue Department does what it can, but it doesn't have enough staff to conduct enough audits to really get the proper amount of money. One of the proposals in the bill last year, quite frankly, was to eliminate the sales tax entirely and to replace it with a decal system whereby, from a point of view of enforcement, if the decal was on the car, any enforcement officer could easily see whether or not the tax had been paid. It also would send a message to the public that if you see that tag on somebody's car, that is a legitimate for-hire vehicle. I think all of that makes a lot of sense. And I believe that we could actually reduce the amount of money per vehicle and actually collect more money in the state than we're presently doing. I think it makes sense, and I think it's a smart move. Going to the issue of the safe driver. This is something that in the legislation that we talked about last year was talked about from the point of view of exactly the issue that Representative Powell raised. Should we allow a private sector entity to do their own background check and the state abdicates all responsibility as to whether or not that's a safe driver? Now, there is legitimate concern on the part of Lyft and Uber and our industry that basically says, look, we don't have to create a bureaucratic nightmare for somebody to be able to get this chauffeur's permit, which is, I think, what Chairman Powell has talked about. There should be a way that agencies can talk to each other. If a GCIC background check is required, if we need to make sure that we're going to have a standard for DUI history, criminal history, etc., then all of that can be done in a way that hopefully somebody like DDS, after they get a waiver, either whether it's from a limousine or a taxi company or Uber and Lyft, to say, okay, this person has signed saying that their GCIC report can be sent to driver services, and therefore this endorsement for the chauffeur's permit can be gotten across the board. What we would insist on to some extent is that please treat all drivers the same. There is just no reason why a driver for Uber or Lyft or Kerry or Checker Cab or whatever should have a different standard as to whether or not this is a safe driver in the state of Georgia. So I think that that is something that's very important for the public safety issue that has to be addressed. As far as the car is concerned, you have the same exact issue. Under current law, both a taxi or a limo has to have their vehicle inspected by a governmental agency to make sure that the car is safe. The question is, if you're going to have a criteria, whatever that criteria should be, it should apply to everyone. And you have the decision to make as to whether or not you're just going to have the private sector company do their own inspections and you're going to take their word for it that it's okay. And I think that could be problematic. There's issues of liability on all that. But again, this entire issue comes down to, although there are ancillary issues, it is the safe car, the safe driver, proper insurance, and the proper amount of tax, if any, should be paid. The insurance issue is a little more complicated, as Representative Powell said, and I will defer to the people to give you more detail, but let's deal in the practical world. somebody who has a taxi or limo, they have commercial insurance. So that driver, when he starts the engine and starts driving, if he hits somebody on the way to picking somebody up, or hits somebody after they've dropped somebody off, that coverage is there. The question is, how is the coverage for one of the companies like Lyft or Uber? Do they just merely cover them from app on to app off, or do they cover them for the entire time that vehicle is out in the streets? That's a public policy decision you will have to make, and we would ask that we have a level playing field on that issue. I am sure the insurance industry is very sophisticated and will come up with policies that have sufficient coverage. All we ask is that the law be clear enough so that everybody has to have the same type of coverage, so that the public is protected, whether you're a passenger in the vehicle, whether you are a driver in that vehicle, or whether you're a pedestrian who happens to be in an accident, or another car who's in an accident with that particular taxi, limo, or app company. Those are the key issues that we went over. I would say that we have concerns about other issues, which would be protecting consumers against surge pricing. If Representative Powell gets in the vehicle and he has used a particular service and he has gone from point A to point B and it's cost him $45 20 times in a row, if he gets in there on New Year's Eve, should he not know that on that night he's going to be charged $95 because it's a peak area? The bill that we worked on last year said there had to be disclosure to the customer that before they got in, they understood what the price would be. There needs to be a decision made by this General Assembly as to the limitation of liability. Can a taxi, can a limo, can Lyft, can Uber, can they have their customers agree that you're waiving liability if you get into this vehicle? How much do you want them to be able to do that? That's an issue that has to be addressed. We don't want to compromise public safety. We understand we have different models here, but we want everyone to be able to feel secure in the public that what they're getting into in terms of their vehicle and their driver is a safe issue. We are in favor of having the credit card option for payment, and that was in the bill last year. There are people who want to pay with credit cards, and we don't think a driver should be able to refuse someone who wants to pay with a credit card as opposed to pay with cash. There are some issues of whether or not somebody who wants to pay with cash should they. I think Lyft and Uber certainly explained to me that that's all their model allows is credit cards. They don't allow cash. An issue you all have to, reconcile. We want consistent and vigilant enforcement. There is a big issue onto enforcement to make sure that there are a number of local municipalities that are of the view that they don't know whether the Lyft or the Uber model, is it a limo, is it a taxi, is it something else? Do we have regulatory power under our local government when we deal with taxis, or should this be handled on the state level? Obviously, the bill that was drafted last year, all referral companies and their drivers would have to register on the state level, because we felt that that was going to be the simple way to do that. A zero tolerance as to use of drugs, obviously, and alcohol and things like that. A truth and fair in pricing, as I mentioned to you earlier. Overall, we would like to see a system that has a level playing field, that doesn't just encourage for-hire transportation in the metro area. We would like to see in places like Hart County and rural areas that we'd be able to expand the whole view of people being able to get for-hire transportation. That's why we're not opposed to any use of an app. We're not opposed to people who are willing to drive safely. What we have to figure out is really the points that Representative Powell made in the very beginning, and that is we have to decide whether or not the state is going to take responsibility to make sure that whoever the driver is, that is a driver that's not just been vetted by that company, but whether or not you feel that there's a responsibility that the state ought to do some background check and have these people get a chauffeur's permit as to their driving record, as to their criminal record, and their ability to drive safely to the public. That is really probably the key issue. I firmly believe that there was a lot of good faith among myself and the people I worked with last session. I think there was a lot of misinformation thrown our way to try to derail this bill, which they were successful in. But at the end of the day, we're not that far apart. But it is going to take a policy decision on behalf of all of you to do something responsibly in the tax area, and to do something responsibly in the area of, if your son or daughter or family member was getting into a vehicle, how safe do you want it to be? I mean, we have seen examples where industry has been very responsible on various things, and then we've seen other examples where the financial industry, for instance, has not been so responsible, and there had to be some emergency measures taken to pull it out. We don't want this to become a train wreck in a lot of respects, but clearly the options for transportation need to be expanded as much as possible. All we're asking for is a level playing field, and for all of you to please address the four main issues: the safe car, the safe driver, proper insurance, and a sane method of taxation. I've talked with the Revenue Department. I know Representative Powell has. They can't truly tell us how much is collected from sales tax, from taxis and limousines. They have a guess. That guess is around $2 million. I can tell you that when you look at the total number of transportation companies and whatever, that if we had a decal and we charged a few $100s for that decal, with probably 7,000 vehicles out there, we'd be collecting more money than that. Everybody would be treated the same, and we would have better enforcement. Those are the kinds of things I think that we really need to think about. The final issue is there has to be a judgment call made on whether or not we really have governmental agencies work with each other. Local governments right now regulate taxis. As Representative Powell indicated, limousines are regulated by the state. Probably, unless the world turns on its head, my guess is that the rideshare services, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world will be probably, if they're going to be regulated, you're probably going to do it on the state level. But the question then is whether or not it makes sense to have intergovernmental agreements so that local government and the state can work together, because you, I'm sure, will hear public safety tell you they have trouble with manpower or woman power. You will hear local governments say, they don't know if they have enough people, and we need to marshal everybody together so they can enforce whatever it is that you pass in a fair and equitable manner. I am not in favor of building a large bureaucracy, but we've got people, if we'll join together on this, to do it. I'll make an analogy. There was industries that used to have sales tax on their gross receipts, and we did away with that and used a decal system for that particular industry, and we today collect 20 or 30 times the amount of money than we used to with the sales tax system. Yet at the same time, most people are paying less money than they paid before. That's a win-win. I mean, we all did a TABT system. I mean, I'm sure you're all sick of hearing about it, but at the end of the day, the majority of people pay less for their cars today than they ever paid before, yet the state's collecting more money. Well, why is that? Because there were plenty of people cheating. And we no longer have an annual ad valorem tax on those vehicles, so there are better ways to do things. And I hope that the committee will work hard in asking all the right questions to really push the transportation industry, and that includes everybody in this room, to really do a little bit better than we're doing right now in terms of administration and enforcement. So with that, Representative Powell, I'll be happy to answer any questions or any inquiries the committee has.
Carson.
Thank you, Mr. Snyder. I appreciate your comments. I just have a couple of really more fact-based questions. Could you describe the the sales tax on taxi and limo services? Is that based on and obviously that's at some percentage. Is that percentage determined by the point of pickup, the point of destination, or the place at where the taxi or limo service is registered? For example, you could have somebody pick me up in downtown, take me to Cherokee County where the tax is 6% as opposed to here where it's 8%.
Right. It's been a constant source of irritation for the industry.
Okay.
I believe that the working rule, and I may be incorrect with this, but I believe the working rule is where you're picked up is the tax that you deal with.
Okay.
So if you get picked up in an 8% area or a 7% area, that's what you'll pay.
And the tax is based on the total fare excluding tip, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Now, if the tip is mandatory, then it
Okay.
would include that.
My final question is in regard to the insurance, and I've received some feedback from constituents who are very passionate about this issue. At the same time, I have talked to a few people in the insurance industry in various meetings and so forth that they believe there's, based on feedback their agents are getting, independent agents, that there's quite a few Uber and Lyft and other drivers that are not properly insured. My question is just more of a fact base. If you have someone in a sedan or a minivan or what have you that's running a taxi here in Atlanta, how much is could you just give me a ballpark or a range in regard to what the insurance premium is for just a four-door sedan or a minivan or what have you? About how much is that driver or is that taxi company paying for that insurance premium for that vehicle?
There are, it's difficult to, I want to be factual with you. Let me make a distinction between a taxi and a limo in
Okay.
the sense that a car that's covered under the state law as opposed to the car under a local law.
Okay.
Under the local law, a company can self-insure with their own captive insurance company and have coverage.
Okay.
The limousine company has to have a certain level of coverage and there is a prescribed maximum in the law. You're asking for the cost issue, so I will just defer one moment. Dennis and Rick, let me just ask you both. If you have a regular sedan car, Dennis, and you had to pay commercial insurance that year on the car, can you give an approximate ballpark on that? I'm sorry? $4,800 to $5,000 for a sedan for that. And Rick, if you have a taxi or a van, or a taxi van, I guess you'd be saying,
Either or.
if you had to quantify the amount, and I understand it's a self-insured issue, but if you had to quantify the amount, what would that commercial insurance cost you?
Approximately $150 to $200 per car per month.
Okay, but then you'd have the self-insured piece on top of that, right? So we'd be at 150 to 200 times 12, so you'd be 2,400. So the difference between private insurance and commercial insurance is a substantial difference. Now,
That's okay.
yeah, in defense, not in defense, but addressing the issue that Representative Powell talked about, you can have your personal insurance.
Right.
And I believe most personal insurance policies require for you to notify the insurance company if you're going to do any for-hire transportation.
And if you do not inform the insurance
And
company?
there's an accident, then there is no coverage.
Okay.
All right. Now, I think the issue that I think the challenge and the issue that the Lyft and the Uber industry would have would be if they have an umbrella policy that sits on top of the base insurance. You have two questions to ask. Number one, if Lyft or Uber says, don't worry, Les, you have your insurance, but we have a policy above that, and if there's an accident or whatever, there's coverage for you, there's coverage for the passenger, there's coverage if you hit somebody, etc. The question becomes, will the underlying insurance company, will they find that acceptable? So that you can just continue driving when you want to get groceries or whatever. And then secondly, there has to be, the issue is, at what point does that coverage stop? So let's say we talk about that umbrella. You leave your house, you haven't put the app on to get a passenger yet. Somebody gets hit, but you're about to start. Now, if the minute you put your app on, you have coverage all during the day when you're taking people to and fro, you have coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Then you drop off that last passenger and you're driving home and someone gets hit or someone gets hurt. In the case of the commercial vehicles we just talked about, that commercial insurance stays on. I believe when that app goes off, and I'm going to defer to the people from Uber and Lyft to talk about this, but when that app goes off, that umbrella goes away.
Okay.
And that's as quickly, that's as good an answer as I can give.
Thank you.
Any questions from any of the other members of the committee? All right. Thank you,
Thank you very
Mr.
much.
Schneider. Bruce?
Yes, sir, if I may, you'll be very brief. First of all, Les probably put more energy into everything last year other than you, and you know, on behalf of Google, we really appreciate that. I'd like to point out one small thing so that the energy of the committee and staff and all that might be better served during the next few meetings, and that's the question of background checks and how those are handled. We could not agree more with what Les said, that background checks should be uniform and that no group or one group or the other should be held to a different standard. But I think it's important to point out that the concept of the government contracting or using a private service to do background checks is nothing novel or new. And at the risk of offending a GBI special agent who has never heard me say this before, the GBI actually does that for a lot of its non-criminal background service. There's an app, I just looked at it. It's the Georgia Application System or something to that effect. It's a contract that GBI has with a company called Cogent, and it does the exact same thing. It takes the fingerprints and does those background checks. So the idea that a private agency cannot perform the same services, perhaps at an even better level, I think has been recognized by at least the GBI in that case. So I think that's important to keep in mind when you look at whether government can or cannot be the best source for doing some of these background checks.
Go. I think what my friend just said was that we don't necessarily have to get at these people to be vetted to go up there and submit a GCIC report to the state or DDS, even though it might work through the companies, make it work through DDS to do the same, to accomplish the same means.
My understanding of the existing system here, as I was reading it about the GAP system that is used, is that it actually does all of those functions, the GCIC and others. But as I said, I just found it here because I knew there were such systems in place. I can get more information for the next meeting of the committee and go through some of those things.
That'd be good. I'm just glad to hear you say that everybody needs to be on the same playing field.
Yes, sir.
Representative Rutledge?
I'm just curious, when the background checks are, for the industry, once a driver has gone through the background check process, when is it updated or when is it rechecked?
Every year.
Every year, annually. On their anniversary of when they were, okay.
They got the permit.
Would you like to come on up? You want to come on up? You want to sit at the table or testify from up there?
Sit right here.
All right.
How are you? Good morning. I'm Rick Hewitt. I'm the president of Checker Cab Company here in Atlanta. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to tell you a little something about Checker Cab and about these issues that we've dealt with for the last couple of years. Checker Cab's a family-owned business. My granddad started it in 1947 here in Atlanta. So we're a mom-and-pop operation. I think some of these what we call rogue app companies have painted us as a taxi cartel, or these guys that are filthy rich and just trying to manipulate the system. Very far from the truth. We're a mom-and-pop operation. We have a lot of family members that work within our organization, and we're just hard-working business people and always have been. You don't stay in business for 67 years by mistreating people or not providing some degree of service. And Checker Cab in Atlanta certainly fits that bill. The app business, way before Uber came to town, there were apps. There's a company by the name of Taxi Magic, now called Curb. We actually embraced that company about a year before Uber came to town. So Uber wants to paint a picture that they're doing something unique and special. Certainly they have a good a reputation with their customers, and they're very passionate, their customers, about the service that they provide. Our system isn't perfect, far from it. The transportation business is not an exact science. You have a limited amount of resources, and you try to provide service with the resources that you have. All transportation companies are pretty much the same when it comes to that. We'll take Delta Airlines, one of the most respected transportation companies in the nation. When their planes are full and you want to fly, you got to wait for the next flight. If that's an hour from now, if it's a day from now, that's just the reality of having limited transportation resources. So when our cars are full, people have to wait to answer, our phones. They have to wait on a cab. We can't throw somebody out of the cab to accommodate somebody else. We can't hang up on somebody when they want to call. Some of the complaints that you'll see online are just those things. We always make a good faith attempt to schedule and feed information to our independent contractors. All of our drivers are independent contractors. We don't control the means, the manner, or the method in which they operate. We simply lease them a service. That service consists of the medallions. We lease them a medallion. We maintain the vehicles. We provide insurance. We provide marketing and a dispatch office in order to serve the public. We've got a great reputation in Atlanta and have for many, many years. And so Uber came around. We were aware of it. We let the city know that, hey, these guys are coming. They don't have a business license. They don't have any permits. They don't have any driver permits. They don't have the proper insurance. They don't have any of the things that we take great pride in providing to our customers and always have. We've followed the law to the letter and take great pride in doing that and cooperating and doing the right thing. We don't want to disrupt anybody's industry. We want to take care of it and nurture it. And so from our perspective, when they came into town, it seemed grossly unfair for them to be able to do anything they wanted without any regulation or any oversight, when we are heavily regulated and heavily oversighted, which cost a great deal of money to abide by. So as far as level playing field and fairness, we feel this committee should try to accommodate that for everyone. And I'm going to mention public safety last in my little speech here, because being safe for the public is important. It's been in public. We've got a great reputation, and we've got a good track record when it comes to safety. And we've been in business a very long time, not a couple of years, 67 years. I have customers call me all the time, and they say, well, is it safe to ride with one of your drivers? I tell them the same thing every time. In 67 years of business, we've had 12 drivers killed by passengers. Never had a driver hurt a passenger other than an automobile accident in 67 years. A lot of that is the regulations that we abide by. Now, it doesn't take much looking at the news to see some of the things that are happening with the unregulated app systems. I just hate to see that it get to a point where in the state of Georgia somebody has to get hurt or raped or hurt in some way because we haven't done the right thing. And that's to provide the public safety that has been in place in this state for a very long time. And with that, I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rick. Any questions? Questions from the committee? Thank you, Rick. Do we have anyone else from the taxi or the limo industry that wants to speak or to address the committee at this point? And you'll certainly have that opportunity when the transportation referral folks come back with their corporate folks at some point. Given the prerogative of the chair, Bobby, could we get y'all to come up and maybe talk a little bit about insurance for us, since that seems to be a issue. It's one of the issues involved here. I know nobody prepared to talk today. I knew this is, Reggie and I said this was going to be an organizational meeting, but tell us a little bit about, and as I was sitting here, and this is such an evolving issue, and you would think after all those hours last year of last session of trying to put some of this stuff together, that I would probably asked about every question could be asked, because we quite frankly stumbled onto the insurance part of this dilemma at some point. But as I was sitting here, and I understand maybe y'all can tell us from the industry standard, did I explain it pretty well right a while ago about the insurance problem?
Yes, sir, I think so.
That
Yes,
you've
sir.
got people out here who are driving, but they're driving under they're basically their homeowner's insurance. And if they have an accident, then they'll be disqualified from coverage. Is that pretty well because it wasn't
Generally
commercial?
speaking, yes, sir. Members of the committee, my name is Stacy Freeman. I represent the Property Casualty Insurers Association of America, also known as PCI. It's a national insurance trade association. And what Chairman Powell is referring to is what most people call livery exclusion, for-hire transportation exclusion. And generally speaking, most private passenger automobile insurance policies are going to have that exclusion in there. And the way it operates is essentially, as the chairman said, if you're operating for-hire transportation services, there is no coverage afforded under the private passenger automobile policy. Now, whether or not a TNC, a transportation network company, may or may not have voluntary coverage they're providing behind the scenes, we don't know. They say that now they are, and it's becoming more prominent, but it's not anything that's actually required in the law at this moment.
All right. So during the testimony last session, the large national companies were saying that they had an umbrella that they felt like covered their drivers. So if there wasn't a base policy, would that umbrella in fact cover them in lieu of?
Well, so I'll chime in on that. Bobby Potter, and I represent State Farm Insurance Company and the American Insurance Association. So my understanding of that is that an umbrella is excess over something. That something has to exist, and that something would have to be the primary coverage. In the circumstance that you've described, Mr. Chairman, that Stacy just described, the something is the private passenger automobile coverage, but if there is an exclusion there for livery, then there is no primary coverage with that underlying carrier. So there's no umbrella to exist over that. It may be separate coverage, but it wouldn't be an excess to
Not a base policy,
base
so the
policy.
umbrella
Base
wouldn't be in
policy
effect.
wouldn't exist.
So let me carry it to the next step now. I understand through discussions with the companies that they're dealing with insurance. They're trying to get some sort of a policy with one of the big insurance companies that would cover all of their drivers. Do you know if that is in fact, I'm sure, a possibility, and I'm sure when the corporate folks come, they'll talk to us about that. But is that?
I'm sure that's a possibility, and
that may not be a fair question, but there was something that struck me in the midst of the testimony a while ago. Insurance companies, when y'all are setting these, say there's an arrangement made with Uber and Lyft and all these others, so there's a master policy per se that covers these drivers that are driving for these companies. conditions that insurance companies will put on them. What kind of conditions would those insurance companies put on their drivers about a background check? Could y'all possibly be the venue for a background check? Would y'all insure? Let's just use Uber for instance. Uber has they strike a deal with the national insurance firm that would contract to cover all of the liability for their drivers. Would that be of a concern to the insurance companies that that person had a good background check before they were covered?
Can I ask a question, Chairman?
You sure can.
I want to give Bobby a chance to think about that answer.
I guess it's bad that I'm saying that, but I listened to what Bruce had said a while ago about, farming out the background checks and such, privatization of the background checks. And it just struck me that the insurance companies might have a say about who they're going to insure.
So you're talking about, Mr. Chairman, I just want to clarify. I'm not questioning. I just want to clarify. You were talking about, instead of it being as self-regulated within Uber and Lyft and without setting up another state agency to do so, you're talking about asking the P&C insurance company for the auto coverage and medical and what have you, whoever's writing that policy, to also do a background check at the same time for commercial coverage?
No, I'm not necessarily saying they would do the background check, but I'm just wondering to myself if the insurance companies, if John Doe is a driver for Uber or Uber X,
right,
and that driver is covered under that company policy that they've got, would the insurance company have an interest in the criminal background check of that driver?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, I think the answer is yes, that the insurance company would have an interest in who, in fact, they are insuring. That would seem fairly logical.
What about the condition? One of the things hasn't came up except from our friends in the taxi limo industry about vehicle inspections that the metro folks and state agencies require on those vehicles. Would the insurance companies also have an interest in the mechanical inspections on those same vehicles if they're doing a, quote, commercial livery policy on them? May not be a fair question, but I'm just sitting there, as some of this came up, it just struck me because
It's a fairly broad question. Would they have an interest in it? They would have an interest in the vehicle operating soundly. I don't know that it's a part of the basic policy that would ensure that there was a safety inspection, for instance. But would they have an interest in it? Certainly.
Well, I mean, the reason I asked that question is I heard what was said that we've got three distinct categories of livery service here. We've got limos that are regulated by the state, and they have to have these background checks. But they also have to, I think that the limos also have to have a certificate they've had an inspection on a periodic basis. Taxi operators are regulated by the cities and whatever the bureaucracy that they've got set up in various cities. They do the background checks on their folks. They also check to be sure that these vehicles are inspected. Then we have this new livery service that, the only one that, as I understood from last session, is that the company does their background checks, but the company also does the inspection of the vehicle, the mechanical inspection. So if y'all will be writing policies, if negotiations are for these companies to write a policy, my interest would be, it seems to me like the insurance companies would then have an interest not only in the background check, but also in the mechanical sustainability of the vehicle. You don't want somebody running down the road on 3 wheels that y'all are insuring. Am I?
Well, I think that's correct, Mr. Chairman. But the two of us that are sitting.
I think, Bobby, I think what I'm doing, I'm asking questions that might be getting a little bit further above, because if they're negotiating, I got a feeling that the insurance companies or underwriters that will be doing business with these companies, they're the ones that's going to set criteria. If they're going to insure your drivers, per se, they're going to have a demand that, well, we want to be sure that these people are background checked or they have a good criminal background and that the vehicles they're driving are of a safe nature.
But to the extent you opened with the thought, Mr. Chairman, this is a new business model, it affects the insurance world. And the insurance world, I think, is reacting to it just as regulators are reacting to it around the country. And the insurers, there will be some insurers that will be interested, I think, in insuring Uber or Lyft or other transportation networks. There'll be some that will not. That's not their niche. That's not their market. But those that are, and those that are interested in that, will absolutely be interested in who the drivers are that they're insuring and what kind of vehicles they're insuring.
Questions, guys? Ladies? Guys, I thank y'all.
So,
And I hope y'all can come back at a later time because, you know, let some of these oddball thoughts that I'm putting out there, it might start thinking up. Somebody wake
I
up in the
do
middle of
have
the
one
night.
question. I'm sorry.
Yes, sir.
For our next meeting, I don't expect you to come prepared with this. Is there any way we can find out how many drivers from the taxi industry or so forth, yes, they do have coverage and so forth, or maybe some small percentage do not have, or I don't know what the cover percentage is. And then compare that to, is there any data in regard to the for-hire driver service, such as Uber, Lyft, so forth? Is there any estimate as to how many of their drivers are properly insured with commercial insurance policies and so forth? And I don't expect those numbers today, because this is supposed to be an organizational meeting, right? But it's something I'd like to see. If the data is available, and I don't know that it is. Does that make sense?
yes. Makes sense. I don't know if the data is available either.
To your point.
We'll look. Okay.
Cool. Lynn?
With a quick follow-up before you jump off. If there is any data or experience nationwide in the for-hire industry where there was a rejection of claims from the commercial insurance umbrella policy based on the fact that the personal policy had an exclusion of for-hire. Has there been any situations where an accident occurred and coverage was disallowed because the underlying policy had that exclusion? And if there's evidence or any kind of data that shows that this glitch has occurred and it's problematic system-wide. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sure there is. Some of it will be anecdotal, but I think we can come back with some information about that.
Thank you, Bobby. Thank you, Stacy.
Yes, sir.
All right, since this was supposed to be an organizational meeting, and now we're sort of getting into the mix of some things. This ought to give the committee members some things that they can. When you wake up in the middle of the night, you might have some questions. Jot them down on the pad next to the bed. We've got some other folks out there, and this committee will certainly get to know them at the proper time. We've got folks from the Department of Driver Services. They're going to be here to talk about chauffeurs permits and the process for that and how that operates. We've got our friends with the GBI that can certainly tell us about GCIC background checks and the such. I'm sure that our friends with the taxi limo, they're going to be following back up with some other things. And then, of course, we look forward to hearing from our folks with the new business model. I will caution the members, or I would ask you to take a good look at this. To understand the full realm of this, take a good look. We're going to have folks from the city of Atlanta, which regulates the taxis. We're going to have the folks from the Atlanta airport. I mean, there's nothing complicated. I mean, there's nothing simple about this whole equation about the public delivery service. I mean, you can't even take a taxi. You can drop off, taxis can drop off, but they can't pick up passengers out at Atlanta airport if they're not paying some kind of a fee. So, I mean, there's a lot more than meets the eye involved into this, and I think if we're looking at parity, and this is a long shot from where we first started on the Public Safety Committee about a background check. It was so much simpler, and if y'all left it alone, it'd be over. We wouldn't be here today. But that being said, does anyone in the audience want to make a statement, as long as it's a brief statement, in preparation for the next meetings? Bruce, if you might be kind enough, I knew that you had some conflicting dates, and I know you want to be here when your corporate folks can come.
Yes, sir.
Would you give those to Abby? And if the committee members would be kind enough, if y'all might could tell Abby when y'all would have a day or 2 days. I mean, I don't have a problem if we want to run these meetings back. If we could get done in 2 days, I'd run them back to back and get this committee out of the way, because it's the holidays are on the way. And I know as much as y'all love me, y'all just don't want to spend that much time with me before the holidays. And so if your committee members would just sort of get with that, let's see if we can coordinate a couple of days that we can meet. No questions from anyone? I want to thank everyone for your interest in coming today. And let's just prepare to move forward. Maybe we can find a solution, and maybe some of us won't get villainized as much. Thank you.